All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you could now take a seat so that we can start the last session of the morning. So my name is Serge Bogart. I'm the Prace Managing Director. I have the privilege to convene the session of this morning, but I actually will quickly hand over to Guy Longsdale from Scapos, who accepted to moderate today's panel discussion about the future of scientific and industrial computing in Europe. Thank you, Guy.
Thank you, Serge. It's good morning. It's my great pleasure to welcome the panelists. And I'll take it from left to right, so I'm changing the order. So on the left you have Nuria Lopez from ICIQ Spain in Barcelona, and her research is in chemistry involving HPC and big data. She's chair of the Prace Scientific Steering Committee. Next to Nuria we have Zoe Cornea, who was the winner of the Prace Ada Lovelace Award for HPC in 2016. She's representing applications, so her area is investigation of drug design, in particular for cancer, using HPC. Then we have Lee Margetts from University of Manchester. He's an associate professor at the School of Engineering. He's chair of the Prace Industrial Advisory Committee, and he's also chair of the NAFEM's HPC working group, so his applications meets industry. Next to Lee, we have Vid Vondrak from IT for Innovations in the Czech Republic. He's the managing director of IT for Innovations. He's also a professor at the VSB Technical University of Ostrava. And he's the representative of the Czech Republic in the Prace Council. And finally, last but not least, Thomas Lippert, who you will know. He's director of the Uli Supercomputing Center and executive director of the John von Neumann Institute for Computing. He's the Prace Council chair and I think vice chair of the RIAG, the EuroHPC RIAG. So what we're going to do is we've discussed some questions. We haven't yet discussed the answers. That's what's going to go live now. So we'll ask. We have a set of questions that we'll have discussion in, and then we'll check with you if you have any open issues or questions to those. And then later on, hopefully if there's enough time, we'll take questions from the audience to the panel. So our first question concerns a topic that's been discussed earlier in the conference and in other fora, namely that we're actually shifting eras in HPC. We're moving from the modeling and simulation era to the data science and learning artificial intelligence era. And I have two questions for the panel. The first is, to what extent is that transition affecting your research community or the operations of your research facilities? And the part B to the question is that affecting, this change, affecting how you're getting the next generation of researchers and experts into your particular field? So maybe it'll be politically incorrect, and we'll start with Thomas. We'll go men first. Thomas.
Okay, thank you for this very important question. I personally see, I have several hats here. So one is of course Prace, the other one is building technologies and also doing science here. Let me start with Prace. I think Prace in some sense is very well set to meet those challenges, as the heterogeneity of architectures is of course one primary principle to react to users' needs. So different architectures are in the pool of offered machines on the one hand. But what your question implies is something different. And you see it if you look at the general tenor of all those meetings that we had at this conference and also at the BTEC meeting that runs in parallel here. It is a workflow issue. How do we really do the increasing amount of research done with such type of problems where data and data-intensive calculations, the inclusion of data plays a role and the analytics plays a role, at the same time where also simulation is executed, so in a workflow involving even AI. So it becomes more and more complex. And if we look at this, on the one hand, many have understood that this requires a major software development effort on the one hand, but I personally also believe, and now I take the other hat, that this will be in the future very much reflected in the architectures that we see, and that we do not just let's say, make a hint to, you have this architecture here and the other one here and the other one here. In order to do workflows where very often the latency issue or the concurrency of different codes at the same time plays a role, it's very important that architectures become more heterogeneous and can be used in this heterogeneous manner. You know that this will require a lot of attention as to underutilization of traditional technology. I also believe this goes along with changing technology to what I would call disaggregation. With this, I would like to stop.
Okay. So maybe I will speak rather about our communities within our country, because I'm very familiar with that. So, of course, we observe higher or increasing requests for computing resources for data science-oriented computations and so on. But I would say that actually this is not the dominant still. So dominant is still the standard numerical simulation. But if you look at those numerical simulations, we can see there also, for example, machine learning techniques or data sciences inside such as just a standard or original numerical simulation. So from this point of view, it's sometimes very difficult to estimate what's the real extent of the use of the data-oriented computations on our system. But definitely, what we are doing, we are of course trying to somehow to respond for this demand from the user side, and we are designing our systems just to fulfill their needs. So. But it's sometimes very difficult, because it's very difficult to estimate, for example, let's say the capacity of the data storages and so on. That's something what is really difficult to estimate. Someone is talking about a prediction with the exponential increase, but would it be true or not? So that's really difficult, because so design such a systems to fulfill potential future needs is sometimes very difficult. Nevertheless, we are trying to somehow to fulfill those requirements and predict what will happen in the near future. So that's very challenging from our point of view.
Okay. So Lee, maybe you can give what your industrial users, your advisors, telling you.
Okay.
Or your personal view, but
no. I know I'm here to, give the industry viewpoint. So I joined the Industrial Advisory Committee initially as a representative of the NAFEM's trade association, which is a trade association for modeling and simulation in automotive, energy, all these different engineering sectors. And my position on the committee is representing software vendors. So from the point of view of software vendors and that industrial community, all of the software that is available on the market needs to be rewritten. Yeah, there are commentators in that community that say all our software tools for industry we need to get rid of them and start from scratch. This is the consequence of these developments in the technology. So if we go to the EDF keynote, what we saw EDF doing is investing in open source. And this is very smart, because it means that your software base is continually being updated. So there is a split in the market from the traditional commercial packages and this open approach.
Is that move or that shift that they have to do because of the move to workflows and machine learning linked to their simulations, or is it more the exascale systems that's the challenge?
It's the combination of the increasing innovation in algorithms, so that, you know, this hybridization of the hardware. 50% of companies in NAFEMs use cloud computing. You know, so they're using HPC. It is workflows, and also it's interfaces for, you know, graphical user interfaces. The next generation, or the current generation of graduates that we're producing from universities, are used to interacting with computers with their finger. Yeah? And then they go to an engineering company, and to move an engineering object in the graphical user interface is not a mouse. They have to type a vector into a box. You know, so there is a lot of legacy problems in every single aspect of computing in industry.
Okay. Zoe, you're coming from, you're working in an area where workflows are absolutely
yeah.
existing for years. That's the big story.
Yes, I think the community is actually more ready to integrate these new challenges. So I'm representing the life sciences. So I think with the digitization of health records, the genomic era, with the advances of next generation sequencing, as well as computational biology that I'm representing, with more protein structures coming out, we have really accumulated in the last 15 years massive amounts of data. And this really have seen it dictating new architectures, new networks, but also new workflows for data archiving, data analysis, and data collection, of course. So I think basically we're also seeing a change in transforming the curricula. So where I'm coming from, I see that there's more and more master's programs in integrating computer science with medicine and biology. We have more graduates that combine these two assets. And we have this new kind of experts that are between computer science and natural sciences. So I think we really need to transform the way we're going to have career deployments for these people, because they need a different path than the traditional, need to create more permanent jobs for them. We need to integrate them in our science. For example, in our case, we always work with our system administrator and integrate his knowledge to optimize our codes, to enhance our outputs, and we always include them in the scientific publications. I think these people should be recognized. These are a new kind of experts, and that goes more to your second part of the question, how this advent of big data is enabling new careers. So I think the challenge here, as in life sciences, as in probably many other disciplines, is this issue of convergence between high-performance computing and the big data. And of course, we're seeing it with the workflows, as it was mentioned, with architectures becoming more heterogeneous.
Okay,
thanks.
Nuria, how does the Prace Scientific Steering Committee react to the change in the era?
I think it's very challenging for all of us to see how the future will come, but I see very many opportunities. So the field of Zoe and also my field, which is material science, we have gathered data, and this is very common to very many of the different groups. But and we know that many of our codes need to have an upgrade, and goes again to the software and the centers of excellence. We know that there is more work to be put in this part than we can infer now. So it's going to be a long task, and I think that it needs a cooperation of all the different groups and all the different units that we have in Prace and also in EuroHPC. But the possibility to do things that are beyond our imagination, this is what is really challenging us to really go further, and reinforcing all this training for all these profiles that Zoe was describing, all these hybrid profiles with one of the legs in data science and the other one in the specific applications. So, yeah.
Okay, so did they answer the question? Do you have a follow-up from the audience that says, yeah, I want to check with one of the panels on one of those aspects? Did they explain the era shift into data science and learning? If there's no question, that means they did, thank you. But is there a question from the audience for this particular topic? Okay. Then we'll move on to well, we've seen the shift of era in the way that HPC's done, what HPC means, but now we have the big challenge. Everybody needs exascale. So if everybody needs exascale, I have two questions. Well, what are your hopes for the breakthroughs in your research community by having exascale systems or extreme scale systems? And in your opinion, what are the strategic challenges to actually get to that goal? And let's start with Nuria from the Prace Scientific Steering Committee view.
Yeah, I think that in the scientific steering panel and in the community, there is a lot of hopes for very many different areas, and the scientific case just proposes a big group of them. We have seen developments in the integration of experiments together with high computations, and one of the last one was this image of the black hole that we just saw the other day. So we are going to see more and more of this, and we think that in this way this is going to be disruptive. For some of the other codes, when we know that if we have more resolution, we will be more precise, or we could provide more robust answers with more accuracy, this is going to be also a very nice challenge, and I think that we are going to take this challenge. Also, this uncertainty evaluation that we know for some of the predictions, that's going to be a challenge too. But I think that with all the information and all the new advances in the software and the high performance computing, we will be able to advance, really push forward in all these very many directions.
Zoe?
Yeah, so in my case, again, in the life sciences, so I'm in a particular area called computational molecular biophysics, so we're studying the structure and function of proteins and try to create new candidate drugs. And right now we're at the moment that we're able to simulate 200 million atom virus. So this is already huge, but with the advent of exascale, the breakthrough that we're expecting is that we can lift some of these approximations and perhaps simulate all these systems by using quantum chemistry, and then being thus more accurate, having a higher level of resolution, which will allow us to be very predictive in the candidate drugs that we can make, thus reducing both the time and the cost of a drug to market. So this is the breakthrough that I'm expecting, and I definitely think that the future of structural biology will be computational. And then to the second question that you asked, strategic challenges, I think this is a very important question for Europe. I think it has been already addressed by the EuroHPC Joint Undertaking with their infrastructure pillar and the research and innovation. The challenges, I think, is that, of course, the EU has been dependent on non-EU technologies, and with the European Processor Initiative, I think this is beginning to emerge, new growth and new technologies for Europe and from Europe. Of course, the code designing, the fact that there was insufficient coordinations, I think, is being resolved now with the competence centers. And of course, with the JU, it's a nation-wide, EU-wide initiative. And finally, I think that the investment is in software. I think it's going to be very, very crucial and challenging and crucial to maintain our our leadership in applications in HPC. I think just giving also not only in the hardware but also in the software development is going to be very, very crucial and challenging, of course.
So yesterday in the EPI session, they said we're going to do co-design, but we can't do it with all the applications.
That's right.
Is drug design one of the key ones that they should be coming to you and saying, we do co-design in drug design?
Of course, this is all not a matter of scientific discipline and personal preference. This is all coming from the scientific case that the Prace is producing, of the industrial needs, and of what Europe will benefit from growth. So this is a question, I think, to be decided, and I certainly hope that drug development will be one of the major cases for exascale.
Okay. Lee?
Okay. So I have two examples, and very conveniently, these link to the keynote talks, the industrial keynote talks, because the Prace Industrial Advisory Committee recommend the keynote talks. So the first one, Julian Harou's water modeling, that, Julian demonstrated that he could use an exascale computer now, with his code now, and address socio-economic problems with water resource management now. So there's no challenge in terms of code with his work. But in that example, I invited Julian because this was inspired by the European Commission indicating that some of the EuroHPC capacity would be for urgent computing. So he's already got a code, he's already got a community, he's already got engagement with stakeholders. So the challenge for him now, if there was a pre-exascale system or a service like Prace, would be getting access, because he would have to apply, wait for a call, apply for a call. So the idea of urgent computing for this type of modeling is a very positive sort of addition to the European landscape. So the second example relates to EDF, well, not EDF specifically, but that, the engineering companies. Engineering companies are looking at simulating digital twins. So a digital twin of a nuclear power station, a digital twin of an engine for an aeroplane. And what a digital twin has is the multi-physics and the multi-scale, but it also has all of the recorded data for the operation of the power plant or the engine that's collected by the company, or your car is recording how you drive it, and that data is downloaded by the car company. So the engineering companies want to use all of that data to design the next generation of product. So the challenge for exascale is, how do you deal with multi-physics, multi-scale, code scale, different, the workflow? Because you have we have a mindset, and I think I said this in previous years, we have a mindset of scaling up a code to 100,000 cores, whereas what industry need are applications that use the computing, but they are very heterogeneous applications on what we call heterogeneous computing, but it's not really.
So you've got ensemble predictions, you've got optimization, workflows around complex, but not necessarily exascale individual applications.
The components are not individual,
right,
but the problem is.
Right.
The digital twin of an aircraft engine, so there's machine learning also there from the data.
Right.
So that what were the engineer's assumptions when he designed the engine 10 years ago? How did the engine perform, and how can it be improved? So this is what they want on the desktop.
So for our next two panelists, it's clear that you would be seeing exascale systems at your HPC centers. So maybe so that's infrastructure question, but maybe you switch your hats on and say, well, what my users going to do with it? What's the impact for your users?
From the point of the infrastructure?
No, from what you expect your key users to get out of Exascale. You maybe have different user communities in your systems.
I would say that if I look at our communities, what they expected from the Exascale, I would say that they would like to go to the more precise models, I think. Let's say to shorten the time steps, for example, in the simulations, to actually also to higher resolution in space discretization and so on. That's what I observe, and that's typically the question. Then there is also the enormous amount of data which is necessary to somehow to process. That's as was already mentioned, for example, DNA sequencing and so on and so on. That's something what I see. This is the typically what they let's say our users present if we are talking about our future systems, about the future Exascale system and so on. So I must say that engineering, actually, I completely agree with Lee, for example, with digital twin, which is really very interesting, not only for me personally, but also for our center. But I would like to generalize it. So not only in the engineering. So I think that the digital twin is a technology what we can use also in the biology, for example. That's something what we can also do within societal simulations, or for example, also the floods modeling and so on. That's something what can play the role. That's something what I think that actually that's something what I personally would like to see to have on our computer if it will be Exascale, because right now just to realize the real digital twin in engineering with a lot of multiphysics, that's simply impossible on the small. And of course, if we would like to be close to real time, that actually it's even impossible. So exist some techniques, of course, which could be used for such a simulations to be let's say closer to real time, but not real time for the communication with the real model, of course. So that's something what I would like to see. So from this point of view, it's very important, and actually it was already mentioned. If I'm talking about the challenges, what I see that actually that's definitely that's efficient software stack. That's something what has to be developed, and it was already mentioned that actually some of them should be rewritten from the scratch. So and of course I would say what is really important, that let's say the good base of the well-educated people.
Okay.
That's
training
something what we
again.
really need, because actually software doesn't solve everything and anything. So that's actually something what has to be done by the people. So and then we need them. So that's.
Yeah, so we heard it before from So and from Lee, and especially in industry, that the question of heterogeneity comes up more and more. This is, by the way, no surprise to us. We know about these things, all of us, since years, and some European projects have addressed especially this issue, and one of those where I was responsible for is a DEEP project. It was from the beginning on targeted to address this upcoming heterogeneity of future computing. I think we all face that, and I said it in my first statement. I believe that future machines have to take this into account. It makes no sense to buy monolithic machines and to believe that all those diversity of applications can finally be mapped through a software approach. We also have to take into account in the future this on the architectural level, certainly finally abstracting towards sort of, let's say, more virtualized approach. Especially for industry, we need solutions as a service, we need platforms as a service approaches for these machines. And it will come, and we are on that. If we are going for applications, we should not just look at what is possible today and what would be interesting to let's say, incrementally improve for exascale machines. Of course, this is important on the one hand, but the exascale machines open completely new fields and new terrain, and we have to look for this. Ask people who are in fields which were handicapped by the fact that they did not have enough computer cycles and would be able to apply to those problems they have an exascale, and this is what we do. So I give you an exotic example. Exotic example is not nuclear chemistry, but nucleon chemistry, so that you work with the different energy levels that you have for the different elements. Take, for instance, you have oxygen, you have nitrogen, and all of this. This is completely terra incognita. We have only very crude models for that. Think of, we know it on a precision level that is appropriate for such problems because those energy levels are very, very sharp. And then we could think of catalytic fusion, for instance, and of a really clean type of nuclear energy. One can only do this on the computer in order to explore it. You cannot devise experiments, much too costly and much too difficult. You never get to do that. So people who are in this field tell me continuously, if we have exascale machine, now we can approach, we can go up the ladder up to iron or whatsoever to understand all these detailed properties, and we will open a completely new field. This was expressed by Nobel Prize winners by Wilczek, for instance, as something that we simply do not have today because we do not have the computers to do it. Yeah? So this is one field. The other one was mentioned in one or two of the talks. That's the future of weather prediction. Yeah, so if you go to this more research part of it, it's the Earth System Sciences, they are able to now reliably model and include the properties of the acrosphere, of the soil, of the water evaporation, etc., which you need in order to get a very precise local picture of the weather prediction. And then they start to think of weather predictions that are not just 1 or 2 weeks. People are thinking of 3 months, of 6 months as a goal. This is probably not achievable with current models and with current observations, but now we have a new means. We have first of all an exascale machine going up to the power needed. Of course, again, you would have to have workflows, and secondly, there comes something much more exotic and interesting, combining now models that we have, forward models, with observations that are not easy to include, but that can be included through AI. Yeah, so satellite pictures, etc., that you have continuously. Now we have a completely new means to augment the traditional modeling by data-driven modeling, and in this manner. And this will open a completely new field of predictions. Not only that, there are several others. So I think look into the future, what can be done. Not just only increment those things that we know and are all familiar with. This is not sufficient. There will be a bright future of new ideas coming if you have the instrument. We had this wonderful citation in one of the talks. If you have the right instrument, of course, you will have new ideas to follow.
That was an exciting vision. But one of the challenges I thought you might have mentioned was whether you have a concern that you can pay your electricity bill.
Okay, so I can of course comment on that. It is very important that we do not forget that we can cope with the electricity bill by parallelization. So better parallelize what you can parallelize. Don't put it on cores that are expensive and are very dense. They are first of all expensive in an investment, and then in terms of electricity. We have in some sense stopped to follow thinkers of the 90s who had devised processors that had very low electricity power consumption, in the sense that they were just reduced to the bare necessities for computing. With the scalability part of codes, you can do that. You can, of course, not do it with the complex part and not do it with those parts that have to handle the data. But we have to devise our computations to be associated to the right one at the right time. And then the most expensive one, where you really have to invest the energy, you scale up to, I don't know, 100 million cores, but cheap cores, not very energy consuming cores. And the other ones you won't do, you have to find the right balance. This is the only way to come as close as possible to what we call the limitation of Amdahl's law. We forget to look at this because we are hampered by latency, by throughput, etc. It's much severe today. But in order to really devise a system that can do that, we have theoretically, practically to look into that, and we should not stop this. We should do it.
Thank you. Questions from the audience on the topic of challenges in exascale and expectations and impact for going to exascale? Okay, so you were very clear, thank you. I'm going to shift now from perhaps the more scientific view to the industrial one. And I think we've seen from the Prace scientific case very clear, and we just heard some exciting visions of what when we get with science. So it's very clear from the scientific view where we're going. But for me at least, I think the industrial perspective of going to exascale, Lee gave us some examples, but in general, I think it's less clear. And I have a double question for that. So is there perhaps a divergence of requirements from academia and industry towards extreme scale computing? And the second part of the question is, what are the things that we need to do to make sure that there's a transfer from scientific research, academic use, to industrial use? And because I started mentioning the scientific case, then we start with Nuria.
So I think there is the risk of this diversity, I mean, that this divergence. But at the end of the day, when if we improve training, the transfer of technology is also done this way. I mean, by transferring people that we have educated with these new tools and that they know that the potentialities that these tools have. So I'm a little bit less worried by that. Then obviously industries are really pressed by, probably they don't seem so interested in exascale, but BASF bought a very large supercomputer last year. So in areas where, like the chemical industry that has a very long story and very long trajectories, they are seeing the potential for doing the calculations themselves, and they are starting groups in their own facilities in order to proceed with high performance computing in-house. So I think that there is lots and lots of opportunities there, and that we just need to work together between academia and industry in order to figure out which are the main trends that we will see in the future, that we can transfer the technologies that we have and the knowledge that we have gathered.
Zoe, are you going to comment from the pharma industry aspect?
Actually, I'd like to thank you for this question. I think it's a very, very important topic that it needs to be discussed. I'm going to speak more as a citizen of the European Union. So I think it's, we're seeing that we have a very well-educated academic community in HPC, while we're trailing in industry usage and resources. And I've researched a little bit of that, and it seems that there is a European paradox, it's called, which is the perceived failure of Europe to translate the scientific advances into marketable innovations. And I'd like to be a little provocative here. I think this is because really we're not creating enough synergies with the industry. I think this needs to change. If I take the example of the US, we saw in the BDEC, after the BDEC, the representation of the US, it was very clear that their calls and their exascale initiative, it's all coming from the Ministry of Defense, from the Ministry of Energy, from the Ministry of Commerce, in constant contact with the industry. So whatever the real needs are, this drives the call, this drives the technology. And I think this is very crucial for the growth of the European Union. and our economy to know the real needs that the industry creates, that the citizens are needed, because the industry is always going after the real needs of the citizens. So I think we really need to create synergies between the academic community, the industry. We need to educate the industry to use the HPC resources effectively, especially the small, medium enterprises, because these are the backbone of the European economy.
But
and
SMEs on exascale? Really?
This is what I'm saying, that we need to create, we need to start the community. I'm not saying this will become like this in 1 second, but we need to start from somewhere. And if the US is making this, I think it will be possible also in Europe. And to answer your second part of the question, which is what we can do for that, I'd like to mention that I'm the part of the infrastructure advisory group to the EuroHPC Joint Undertaking. And within this infrastructure advisory group, we have created a working group that will document the industrial needs together with the Prace Advisory Committee for Industry. And actually, we hope to draft a white paper that will document the industrial needs, exactly what they need, and to bring it within the multi-annual strategic agenda. Hopefully, our voices will be heard, and I really need to see stronger presence of the industry in using HPC, because I think this is going to be a driver for the European economy.
Thank you. ETP colleagues, take note of the last points. And we're going to jump over Lee, because you, as your industrial advisory board, you should have the last word on this one. So,
okay, so I see that there is some divergence. So because I think that the scientists, they go for their goals much more straightforward. They need computing. They're simply scaling up application because it's scientifically interesting and so on. I must say that actually it's necessary also to differentiate between the large enterprises and SMEs. I think that there is a difference, because what I see, actually, we are in contact, for example, with large enterprises. They can simply buy the HPC hardware, software. Even they can get the people. This is not a problem. But for the SMEs, for example, small SME with 10 employees, that's quite problematic. That's a huge investment, specifically if they need really huge resources for their visions and so on. Sometimes it's very, very difficult. That's probably also the answer what to do with that. So actually, I think that what is important to get them the easy access to such a technology. I mean, not only the access, let's say, to hardware, but also to access to knowledge, also access to let's say to assistance or something like that. That's something what we can give them. So we are somehow trying to help them with the adoption of with the HPC technology and so on. That's something what I can see. And then secondly, I think that together with this access is necessary to develop services for them, like I don't know, HPC as a service, platform as a service was already mentioned. That something will help them also. I think that actually we at our center developed for a long time such a services, and we think that's really helpful for them, because they don't need to spend a lot of time just learning how to access to our computer, how to do that, and so on. That's a way, I think. That's what I see. But if I return back to the divergence, that's I think this is the one of the reason why I see that, for example, SMEs are not going for such a challenging applications like a scientist. I think that for them it's really very difficult, and this is a huge investment sometimes. That's my personal feeling.
Yeah, I see a partial divergence. Yeah? And it is, as I said before, observable for a long time. So we have it since 10 years or more. We reacted in our center by introducing a dual approach, more directed to a more industrial or engineering type of codes, and the other one to scalability. But we have to bring this together again. But this partial split is also on the side of science. We have heard it before that there is so much complexity now coming up and complex workflows that also many scientists cannot cope with exascale machines. We have to bring this together. I have proposed this approach of disaggregation. But I think there is a very important and interesting development going on here in this field. We see many new ideas, and having always this concentration on SMEs, I'm a little bit fed up with that. I see that for years that the SMEs, of course, are not really to bring to these technologies, and there is this hurdle. And let me stress it more, why this is so. Yeah, what is the real problem? The real problem is try to be a startup now and looking forward technological-wise. You would see there are exascale machines. I guess there is a lot of people who would think one could do a wonderful business with exascale machines, but as a startup I have no chance to ever access it. Yeah. So what do? You try to program an app on your iPhone and make money with that. Maybe that's one of the business paths startups can do. But there are so many bright people who can program and know about physical and industrial application fields and have for sure ideas. We simply do not have a program and the means to give those the chance to use these big machines. That's just a matter of fact. And of course, there is also a big hurdle that has to do with the scientific integrity and all of that. It is very clear that only the best ones should be on those machines. So we have things to discuss that at least a small part of cycles and of possibilities is given to new, let's say, very ingenious people who want to make a business with those cycles. Otherwise, it will not happen. That's exactly where I see the problem. And of course, you can then go up, step up to the SMEs. This is a more conservative, let's say, field. Of course, they have to make revenues. They have to pay their people. They cannot invest to go to exascale machines from the staff point of view and not from the point of view that they cannot pay the cycles finally. So we have exactly this problem. This is a problem that can only be solved if there is a political will to solve it. And that is what we have to advocate for from Prace and from EuroHPC.
Okay. Lee, NAFEMS meets EXA? Whoa.
So I need a beer at this point for this question. How do I answer this in a short, concise way? I can give you a picture from the point of view of NAFEMS as what's happening, and then you can make up your own mind whether there is divergence. So I joined NAFEMS in 2007 as a member, a technical member of a supercomputing center, to have an interface with industry. And I talked to the CEO of NAFEMS at that time about HPC, and I suggested, so NAFEMS have working groups for different technology areas, and they have regional working groups. So I suggested, why don't you let me set up an HPC working group within NAFEMS to start, looking at HPC within industry. We're not interested. Yeah, 2007, nobody uses HPC. We're not interested. Thank you very much. We're not interested. So I carried on going to these meetings. 2011, in December, I got a phone call. Our members would like to know more about HPC. Okay, so 2007, not interested. 2011, invited to set up the HPC working group in NAFEMS. Now, 50% of companies in NAFEMS use cloud computing. Yeah, so this is an HPC conference where people maybe think cloud computing, well, what's he talking about? That's not HPC. But for the industry, cloud computing means accessing HPC via an app on your phone. Yeah, so the delivery of they're accessing HPC systems on a pay-as-you-go way with their commercial applications that they're used to using on their desktop. So this is 50% of that sector, right? So this is not, to me, this is not divergence. Now, in terms of industry uptake in companies in Europe, this is very interesting because, and this is an observation rather than a criticism of the European Commission. So we see investment in the HPC community to have engagement with industry. Yeah, so there are programs, there is money. And on the industrial side, where for companies it is not, the language is different. It's not HPC, it's digitization. So the language is different. Technology, not HPC, so that the language is different. The European Commission recognized that industries in Europe need to adopt technology, so they have funded European technology platforms. And those European, I'm not talking about the ETP for HPC, there are 36 European technology platforms. Brendan McGinty from NCSA gave me an analogy, not for this, but we have a situation where we have individual fish in bowls all around Europe. So we've created these European technology platforms for different industries. They're in their own bowl, talking to their own people. I've tried as chair of the Industrial Advisory Committee to make contact with them. So there is one for pig farming, the European technology platform for pig farming. No, for pig breeding, it's even more specific. Yeah, so there are companies all across Europe producing our food, if you're not vegetarian. Yeah, producing our food, and in pig breeding, it's not the mechanics, it's the genetics. Yeah, and there's another one for the power station suppliers ETP, and there are 100,000 SMEs are members. And I've contacted these ETPs, and the language is different. They say, we're not interested in HPC. This is an association, or this is a technology platform to improve the use of technology within our sector. Yeah, so my role is not to go to conferences and ETP meetings, but in order to have this exchange and what we want, which is industrial uptake, we need some funding in that gap between the scientific infrastructure and the industrial thing. We need some funding for people to go across the bridges and visit the individual fish bowls and say, well, we call it HPC, you call it technology, let's have a beer and do some business.
So you want to pour the fish bowls into the EuroHPC pond?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Divergence, industry, academia, use of exascale. I think you've got a lot of interesting responses there, partial divergence, things on the right path. Any questions on to that topic? Okay, let's stay with the extreme scale systems and use by industry. And this overlaps with a question that Lee had in the keynote this morning about EuroHPC has said that there'll be 20% use of their systems for industry. And the question is, what do we understand by that? Do we need to think about a new business model for that use that goes beyond open innovation for R&D? Or should we be looking only at our open innovation in that context? So, Lee, you can start because you've got a mic in your hand and you asked the question this morning.
Okay. So the wording that I've seen on the website is that 20% of the capacity is reserved for pay for use, pay for access, which is very different to the Prace open science model. And so when I was thinking about this question, I've been having arguments with myself ever since I've seen it about what I think. I don't understand what the motivation is to offer that, and what the goal of offering that is. So without knowing what the motivation or the mission and the objectives are, I find it difficult to comment on what the business model would be. So the simplest way of answering this question for me is that in the Industrial Advisory Committee, the companies that make that up, there is continuous emphasis that they're not interested in buying cycles. They want a relationship with scientists. So it is a collaborative relationship where problems are solved. Yeah, so the value proposition for this community to offer industry is not cycles. It is access to the scientific community.
Okay. So, Zoe?
Yeah. Yeah, I think for the dilemma, I also had it. I was thinking, oh, should we have open access data, or should we actually use it for pay-per-use calls? I think the motivation from the European Commission is the sustainability of the infrastructure. I think in the back of the mind of the Commission is that this infrastructure should be able to make some money on its own and not be based just on European Commission money and taxpayers' money. I think that is the motivation behind the pay-per-use calls. But on the other hand, I totally agree with you that the actual value of the industry is to leverage all this science, all this scientific input to take technology into the next level. And I think this is the real value. I don't know if we can cost this, like to have a price this. So I'm also not sure about that. I know that 20% is reserved for this pay-per-use call. It could be an opportunity to engage them, but as I hear from Lee, it's not that will be the driver. It's going to be the interaction with the scientists, and this is actually very, very hopeful, I think.
Okay. Nuria, were you on to comment?
Yeah, I have also mixed feelings. I mean, I don't see that obvious that 20% of the cycles open will go. We have heard before that there are things with the protection of the data that companies have, and all these confidentiality issues, they can be very, very hard to follow. I think that the cooperation with the actual scientists, that's much more powerful also for them, and particularly for the small companies, if they are interested. Because, you know, if you're a company of, let's say, 10 people, and then you get advice from someone else, from the scientific community or from the centers, then you happen to raise 10% your workforce if you have one person. So it's a lot of effort that we can put, and I don't know. I think that this business model of the 20% has to be rethought after consultation with the companies, because there might be better ways to use the cycles.
Okay. Thomas?
I have a little bit different opinion on that. I'm sorry. Yeah. I guess it is up to 20%. First of all, it's not a question of that it is reserved and then thrown away or so. Secondly, I think it has to do with the fact that many problems cannot be published because they are, of course, the property of companies and give them a competitive advantage. I agree with the fact that this might not be at a demand today, but I would again want to say that as it is with science and with new ideas for the future, only if you have the possibility to do it, you can go for it. And so let's try that. I find it not too bad to try, and then one can finally adjust or readjust the offers. Fully agree that most of the companies want to get into contact with scientists. That's what they live from. Finally, they want to hire the best ones. And the only way to increase competence is to have cooperation. So it's not only the companies, it's also the defense sector and so on. We know all of this. But for me, the major motivation is we open a new degree of freedom, offering let's say, exascale level, let's say, power, compute power, but also to those projects that can finally not be openly published. We have to try it. We will find out what comes out with it.
Okay. Bit, do you have contacts, industrial partners that would be interested in taking this path, taking that route?
Yeah, maybe I can say a couple of numbers. So, for example, we have approximately 5% of direct contract research together with the companies, and they are paying per use of our system. Then we have some additional, I don't know, 10% of some collaborative research within the public projects, research projects, and so on. So something like that, the numbers like that. So what I see there, if we are talking about a new business model, I think that the problem is that actually it's very often administratively demanding. So we have to actually sign some contracts, ask sometimes people whether it's everything okay, and so on, so on. That's something what actually makes the things much more complicated. And if I was talking about the experience with the SMEs, because they for example, they cannot buy such a system we are operating. So of course, then for them that's the only way how to test their potential business models or their visions or something like that. So then for them it's sometimes very difficult. That's also the reason why they decided to go, for example, to renting some cloud services, commercial cloud services, rather than to go to the HPC. But that's very important to say that actually we are also offering the assistance, yeah, or also some scientific experience and so on. That's something what you cannot get from the commercial cloud services very often. So that's something what's a really added value, and that's also the reason why if someone decides to go for such a collaboration or renting our services, then actually that's the main reason why to go this way. And that's something what has to be a really easy process, I think. Because if it's really administrative demanding, if it takes a long time, that actually companies are losing their interest to go forward for such a cooperation. That's my personal view. That's something what should be somehow resolved with the new business models to make this access easier for them, as I already mentioned in the previous question, just not only the access to computer, to cycles, but also the access to service in general, because it's not only about that, so it's also about cooperation and let's say assistance and so on and so on. That's my personal view, and I must say also the experience from our center.
Okay. So I actually have another question up my sleeve, but I will give you the chance now to ask questions. If you have questions on the future of science and industry computing for the panel, this is now your chance to pose those questions. Just please raise your hand, and there's mics that come around. Okay, then I will take the question out of my sleeve. And it's sort of a question that I don't know if I'm really allowed to ask. When I hear the BDEC talks and the supercomputing conference talking about machine learning, data analytics, I have often the impression this is very much from an HPC point of view, from a scientific computing, modeling, simulation view. We are creating big data, lots of data, enormous amounts, and this is how we can integrate it. But there are possibly, and this is the question, do we think there is an alternative, more disruptive technology coming from the machine learning that replaces modeling and simulation, replaces the HPC as we know it with HPC as we don't know it? Is there a threat from analytics? And Thomas is grinning, so we'll start with him.
I think there is a threat, yeah, in a certain sense. This threat is for those who want to stick with the traditional technology. And you see it already that some very well-known companies offer big boxes of lots of compute cores, maybe on GPUs, working together, that constitute some of the future kernels of systems. maybe they are sufficient for some people to do their deep learning stuff. You can have them in the department or on a level where you would not need big computer halls. In some sense, what we face here is the fact that the big centers and the coming exascale centers, they want and have to serve a community that goes for exascale. We have sketched what wonderful things can be done with exascale. On the other hand, you have the innovator's dilemma situation here. We have to do that on the one hand, and on the other hand, there come technologies that are very good and very fast for specific questions in the machine learning field, in data analytics. And the real issue is, can we as computer centers do a good job bringing those things together? And they grow together, in fact, in the application. We have talked about the convergence of data analytics and simulation, and I gave an example where finally it is only through AI possible to improve simulation results, for instance, in the climatology or weather forecast. So this will come. I strongly believe there is a way to do that, but it requires new thinking as to the compute architectures. And if we don't do that, we will stick with old-fashioned technology. We cannot do that. And those technologies will see that there is a threat, and they will vanish in the future. So I'm sure that the technologies that can bring together the heterogeneity on the hardware level are best, let's say, possible to also bring these heterogeneity to the workflows and finally to the applications. So that's my vote for modularity and modular supercomputing approach.
Great.
Maybe sometimes I see that actually, you know, to use the machine learning or artificial intelligence, that's something like a must or something, you know. So it's I think it's I would say a little bit too much prioritized than sometimes the standard simulation. And that's what I see as sometimes as a problem, because actually if one decides to solve a problem which can be very easily solved by the standard numerical simulation and just running such an application using the machine learning and so on, which doesn't make too much sense, that's something what is not really good, and this is not the right solution. I think that it should be balanced somehow, and I think that this is very important to find the right way how to solve the problems most efficiently. And then of course it depends if I need a part of the simulation which will be solved using the machine learning techniques, because there is no other way, because there is impossible to use the standard numerical exact simulation or even the stochastic or something like that. So then of course I see that there is the right way how to solve the problem, to combine that and actually to use the machine and use, for example, the heterogeneity of the architecture for the efficient use of such a problem. But I think that sometimes people decide to go just only one way, not to look at the problem in a holistic way. So just to solve their problem, I have the tool, and that's it. This is very often not efficient solution. So of course, both from looking at the results, but also looking at the resources used for the solution of such a problem. I think this is something what has to be really solved in the right way, so that actually to find the balance between those new technologies, standard numerical solutions, high performance data analytics, and so on, somehow to combine all together. So convergence doesn't mean all the time that actually I will run deep learning on the large system for a problem which might be solved much more efficiently using the standard simulation. That's my opinion on such a thing.
Lee, if I remember right, the FEM in NAFEMS is really FEM, right? So are we talking about forget FEM, learn?
So in that community, so I did my first degree in geology, and I had learned about dinosaurs and dinosaurs that became extinct, and we drew pictures of the evolution and the extinct branches. So for me, machine learning since the 1970s has been, in that community, has been a thing that professors get a PhD student to do. They publish one paper, and then the topic is extinct because there isn't the computing. Yeah, so there are, if I look back in my discipline of finite element modeling, back to the 1970s, I can find lots and lots of really clever papers about machine learning. So for example, not doing adaptive meshing, just letting an algorithm just do some stuff with inputs and outputs, a load and a displacement of a geometry, and produce answers that are useful to an engineer without any finite elements, without any maths. So there is in the literature, academic literature, these ideas and extinctions all the way through. And so it's a very rich area to have a look at. So I quite like this question from that point of view. So yes, we could end up with just dumping all of the problems that we have in CFD with meshes and finite elements. So, so people have done research in this in the 70s, 80s, and 90s and given up because there aren't the computers. The other aspect of this question that I like is we're on this march towards a big machine in a box. Yeah, and the question is, when we get there at the end of the road and we have this big machine in the box, probably the people that use Prace now will carry on using the big machine in the box. But what your question is alluding to is, are people going to be doing computing in a different way? So if we look at Rosa Badier's talk on edge computing, when I saw the title, I had no idea what she was going to talk about. I saw the title and I thought, what's this? But there are examples where the production of data is occurring on experimental devices at such a huge rate that you can't store it. Yeah, so you have to process it on the fly, and you can't process it by creating a mesh. You have to process it using machine learning on the fly. So experimentalists, so the example that I would have are the people doing, they have the synchrotron light sources, are pouring off data at such a rate that even if they had an exaflop disk next to the machine, it's not enough. So they're using machine learning. So this idea of edge computing at the device, could make us look a little bit silly when we have the cathedral of HPC, or the mausoleum of HPC. This big building with this big box, and people go and look at it with marvel. What were they thinking?
So Zoe, when you next win the Ada Lovelace Prize, will it be with learning?
Sorry, I didn't.
When you win the prize again, next time round, will it be with modeling and simulation, or will you just be learning deeply?
I'll leave that to the younger colleagues by then, hopefully. But yeah, it's a very good point, because at the moment, deep learning as we know it doesn't need a new infrastructure. The hybrid existing infrastructures, you can compute your neural networks and so on. But with the massive production of data, as Lee said, you really need to do on-the-fly manipulation. And I mean, you're producing such big data that you need this computing at the edge. So you need to process things as they go on the fly. We haven't experienced that yet, I think, but it's coming. It's coming. We see it. Experimental centers, indeed, for example, the spallation sources. We have such a huge emergence of data that we'll need to have these new architectures. And it goes back to my original point, having to invest in new software developments, for sure. as we go on to exploit this opportunity. And again, also the point is that for sure at this point we will need to sacrifice physics, perhaps at an extent at least, because we will not be understanding why the result that we got is correct.
Oh, that's a quote for Twitter. Sacrifice physics. Okay.
Yeah, that's right. You should never say things you don't want to see on Twitter. Anyway, I'm actually an editor of a computing journal, the Journal of Chemical Information and Modeling, an associate editor. And very often when I get AI papers with correct results, the reviewers respond, I do not accept this paper because I don't understand why the result is correct. And it's a big battle to get a paper through, because this is what we're seeing. This is the future. This is artificial intelligence. I mean, we're going to have massive amounts of data that we can exploit using the power of harnessing the power of AI, but we are going to have to sacrifice some of the physical principles that we have been used to analyze our previous simulations.
So, Nuria, do you see the specific question for you then will be, in a couple of years' time, you'll have the next Prace scientific case, and we, on the code page, have the Monty Python thing, and now for something completely different.
So repeating it.
You know Monty Python?
Yeah.
So it's not what we did before, it's something completely different, and we're going to be learning and learning and learning.
We will be learning. I'm happy that Zoe made the comment before about physics, so I don't have to do it.
You're not sacrificing anything, right?
No. It's us. I mean, so it's sacrifice. Yeah, we will say that we will be doing something new. I mean, the sense is that I'm sure that we will get a combination of all these things working together. We will get the machine learning and the rest of the algorithms trying to collaborate. We will have this issue, which is, from the scientific point of view, very important, of saying, have we lost the physics on the way? Have we lost the interpretation on the way? And I hope in the next scientific case we don't have to drop it. So we find different ways of how to analyze the results from artificial intelligence and how to rationalize and put the difficult, but I mean, this is one of the challenges, huh? To be able to go back to retrieve the understanding, or and also the error bars that we have attached to this thing. So I hope that this would be in the next scientific case.
Fine. This may be your last chance to ask questions. I have nothing left up my sleeve. Pop my arm. We've got a question, Carlo.
So, my feeling is that since we have, in a few lucky cases, like quantum mechanics, that to the best of our knowledge is exact, I would not give up in trying to solve the equation, because they are exact and they will tell you the truth to the best of our knowledge. The point is that in order to solve those complex equations, we have all in all of our code, we have approximation, continuously approximating the result. So the things I'm trying to figure out, since I'm still trying to develop or to, let's say, teach people how to develop codes, is how we can accelerate or refine the approximation we have in the solving equation. So using artificial intelligence can be used to, let's say, precondition our problem to the point that we can solve them faster and more accurately. So this is my, let's say, my little, let's say, point of view sector, what I think it can be done with artificial intelligence. So combining, we have a new tools, as Thomas has said, how we can use it, and if we can use it best, we can have a better result, less approximation, and a more scientific outcome.
So that was saving physics, at least at the quantum level. Any comments?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the comment. I think we can have both, actually, both physics-based and AI. We can use them together. We can use them complementary and get results. Yesterday I was giving my scientific talk in the life sciences track, and Nuri asked me, what is your success rate in predicting a candidate drug with high-performance computing, that it will actually be active in the lab? And we have done this very many times, and the success rate that we have is 10%. Now, with exascale computing and building on all the wonderful examples that Thomas brought up, imagine if we do not have to do the approximations, as you said, and we can compute at the quantum mechanical level. Imagine what kind of a success rate we will have in drug design. This will be a huge turnout for drug design, really.
One question. Lee mentioned the digital twin. That's a great idea, and we are working with the companies in IT for Innovations on the digital twins. But then you went for the machine learning and sacrificing the physics. Do you really believe that what you learn by the artificial intelligence or machine learning could be as a predictive tool? Because the advantage of the digital twin is that before you will build the actual prototype of the aircraft engine, you have the model, digital, which gives you all the answer, and you can do all the optimization on it. And if you skip this step and go only for the AI, you will be missing this one. You really believe that the AI will give you all the answers on the existing for the new engine?
So you've joined a comment from one member of the panel with a comment of another member of the panel, yeah, and addressing it to me as if both of those questions are linked and are my questions. So I didn't advocate getting rid of physics. No, I don't advocate it, but if you look in the literature for finite element modeling, there are papers where people have used machine learning to predict the load displacement response of structures without any mathematics, only the machine learning, by giving lots of examples. And the examples use the mathematics. Yeah? But then when you remove the mathematics and you say to the machine learning algorithm, what is the response of this structure with this geometry to this load, you get an answer. And then comparing that with the physics-based approach is comparable. And there are research investigations that are published that look at that. And then these become extinct lines of research in the past because it was a curiosity of a professor who, would this work with this technique? Oh, it does. But it's not practically applicable. It's never been practically applicable before now because we didn't have the computing power. Yeah? To create that, what I called when I first talked to a professor presenting this at a conference maybe 20 years ago, is that the program, the approach needed baggage. It needed all of these training sets. And so, there was a sacrifice in accuracy of the simulation to accommodate in the computer all of the baggage, all of the training data. And now we don't have that problem. So don't be surprised is the answer if the machine learning algorithms can do that.
At SC18, there was a session where Boeing, Pratt & Whitney and General Electric were talking along that line. I'm not allowed to comment. Oh, over to the experts. Does anybody else want to comment on this point? Thomas?
I think if you look how physics is made, then of course you also start usually from observations, and these observations go through a neuronal net in our brain, which is probably much more complex than those we have created so far, and distills sort of models and principles, so that it goes certainly many steps further than anything we do with a prediction through application of artificial neural nets. In this sense, I think what we call physics resembles a bit to this. Yeah? So it's also man-made description of nature, and it is made such that we really can apply finally very clean and simple structures to predict things. I believe that the evolution of the neuronal nets will help us to find in very complex situations new physical laws. Yeah? This is finally where we should concentrate on. This is one point. The other one is there are many steps made to understand what finally is done in the probability distribution of neuronal nets. What is it if I apply it to predict something? I also believe here that one will create more and more models of understanding, so that our natural fear as those exact scientists as we are, applying those neuronal nets with the understanding also of their uncertainties and the mathematical description of all of these uncertainties will vanish this fear. As to quantum mechanics, yes, there is certainly in quantum mechanics a very deep hidden exactness, but of course don't forget that it is always a stochastic theory, and if you call a state vector, you also have referred finally, if you want to apply it to a stochastic ensemble. So that's an important point here, then we should not forget inventing quantum mechanics, people have already left, so to say, this Newtonian wonderful view of a very clear clockwork type of universe. It's not what we can apply as a description, unfortunately, in these cases where we have to use quantum mechanics.
I think we're just about in time to hand over back to our chairman, because this isn't the end of the morning session, but I'd like to thank all the panel members for their insights and lively discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all of you. And thank you especially to Guy for moderating brilliantly this panel. You are happy to stay on the stage. Actually, I still need two of you in a minute. As now we will go for the PRACEdays award ceremony. Because as you know, it has been a long tradition in Prace to celebrate scientific and also industrial quality of work that is being done and then presented around HPC, or more specifically with the Prace resources. And this year is no different. And this is no surprise for you, because we already had the presentation by Deborah Sieciowe during the week. Deborah was then awarded the PRACEdays Award for HPC in 2019, and I just wanted to again acknowledge this, and I think we can again congratulate her, even though she couldn't make it to Poznan this year. I think we can. Then we are also awarding the Best Scientific Presentation Award. And this year goes to Michele Busicotti of University of Rome, who has been addressing a presentation on energy cascade in rotating turbulent flows. Unfortunately, Michele had to leave us before the award, so we actually already handed over his award, and also we can't really celebrate this with him, but I think we also should congratulate Michele. Then I would like to ask Nuria Lopez, the chair of the Scientific Steering Committee, for the award of the best poster. And this year it goes to Martin Golasowski with this poster, Distributed Environment for Traffic Simulation. And I guess Martin should be around. Yes. Then the next and last award of this year is the best industrial presentation. I'd like to call Lee Margetts, the chair of the Industrial Advisory Committee, to hand over that prize. And this prize goes to Oriol Lemkool of Barcelona Supercomputing Center with high fidelity simulation of vortex-induced vibration for the flow control and energy harvesting. I think Lee wanted to say a word about this.
So I wanted to say that the decision regarding best paper is quite a difficult one. So there were lots of talks that were very good industry talks, and I noticed from the Twitter feed lots of scientific talks that have got an industry focus. So the decision is quite difficult, and I wanted to just say a few words about Oriol's work and why the committee decided to award his paper this award. So what Oriol has done is he had a shape project with a company, and he interacted with the company, and this triggered some interest in the physics, the science, and so the paper is presented science that was stimulated by working with the industry. And I thought this really demonstrated what I was trying to say in the panel, that the interaction between the science and industry is what we should be focusing on. And this was a really excellent example of that interaction and the creation of new ideas and the solution of problems that scientists hadn't thought about in the flow domain. So congratulations.
Thank you, and congratulations to all the awardees. Now it's the time for me to actually already give you some overview highlights of what has been happening so far. Even though the week is not totally terminated, it will be my last chance to actually give you some address on what we've lived over the week. Whoops. All right. Let me go back. Yep. So we have been having some actually very stimulating, I would even say exciting keynote talks. During the part of the PRACEdays, we have had a number of scientific and industrial talks about achievement with HPC or perspective, and I was really excited to hear all these achievements. We also had an interesting session on an international perspective with the update on the big data and extreme scale computing initiative, and I think it's always nice to see that we are not alone in the world, and that the different regions of the world are actually looking for the same kind of challenges. Of course, it's an obvious one with the EuroHPC Summit week. The EuroHPC Joint Undertaking has been giving a number of updates, especially the state of play of the Joint Undertaking. And we also had a very interesting and important talk about the Prace, the service of HPC. And I would tend to say, last but not least, we had a very interesting session of the user forum that actually shared their survey to the Prace users. And I was, as I said during the session, very glad and in a way proud because we are all contributing to that the Prace users were quite satisfied of the Prace service, and actually they were really supportive of the Prace distributing resources, and I was quite, in a way, surprised but also very happy to see that. Of course, we had very rich afternoons, some would say very dense afternoons between Tuesday and Thursday. Lots of parallel industrial talks. You've seen the result with the awards some minutes ago. So kind of these new EuroHPC sessions with the both on the infrastructure and research innovation pillars and the workshop on co-design. I think it was interesting to have these exchanges during the week, of course. And actually, still today, this afternoon, we're going to have the EXDCI-2 HPC ecosystem workshops. So I invite you to actually still have a look at the program this afternoon and join the workshop to actually continue to exchange on your experience on the different domains, application enabling, the expectation to upstream technologies, and some views on operational services. As a wrap-up, also let me remind you, because it was not hosted here, but at PSNC in Poznan, we have had for the second time, hands-on workshops for students, organized by Prace, but with the support of our partner PSNC. And I think this is very important, as many of you have touched the issue of training people and getting young people to join and to actually contribute in the future to this HPC ecosystem. I think it was very good that we could reorganize this week. We got 10% more registration than the previous year, and we were about 350 attendees to the conference. So I'm happy that the week still attract many of you to share their experience. And for your information, we will be uploading the presentations on the event website in the coming days as the presenters are confirming that we can share the content with all of you. And that's the time for me to thank people, because such an event, of course, doesn't exist without the really active contribution of many people. And I'd like to start with the organization and program committee fellow members, Sinead Ryan, Nuria Lopez, Matej Paprotnik, François Baudin, Veronika Theodor, Vangelis Floros, Lee Margaret, Toul Sogobol, Donata Sikorska, Norbert Meyer, Pascal Bernier-Bruna, Mariolène Osprong, and Silke Lang. We have been working very hard to actually put up a program that is interesting to you, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Thank you to them. Then, of course, thank you to the local host for hosting this event, and I think it was a very pleasant place and a very fruitful and happy event. So again, thank you to PSNC. And then behind the scene, in a way, we have a logistic team having also made all this possible. I won't read all the names, but I really thank them, really all of them. And also, actually even larger, the staff team that was there this week, and also really thank you to them and actually it's even better if you can see the picture and the team, and really this was wonderful support team. Thank you very much to all of you. And then definitely last but not least, thank you to all of you. Thank you to all the speakers, contributors, and participants. And let me just finish by wishing you a safe trip back home, as I guess that in the coming hours you will slowly get back home. And thank you again. I think we are a bit ahead of schedule, but that's not too bad. If you are hungry, I guess the lunch is already served. And again, do not forget that this afternoon we have still a number of workshops. Thank you again.